Mayday, mayday. Scandies Rose. Scandies Rose. Scandies Rose. We're rolling over. Fly.
That distress call goes out at 9:55 p.m. on December 31st, 2019, from the bridge of a 130-foot Bering Sea crab boat. 8 minutes later, the boat is gone. Of the 7 men aboard, 2 will survive, 5 will not. And what investigators piece together over the next 2 years is not the story you expect from a commercial fishing boat, as there are still details that can't and won't be explained to this day. This is the sinking of the Scandies Rose. On December 29, 2019, in Kodiak, Alaska, a captain and 6 crewmen prepare a 130-foot steel crab boat for a winter run into the Bering Sea. The plan is straightforward. Through Shelikof Strait, around the Alaska Peninsula, drop a load of cod pots, start scouting for the snow crab opener. The captain is Gary Cobbin Jr., 45 years of fishing experience, 40 as a captain. He has been running the Scandies Rose full-time since 2009. His business partner calls him the most experienced fisherman he has ever been around. Gary owns 30% of the vessel. The majority owner is a man named Dan Matson, who manages the boat from Bremerton, Washington. The remaining stake belongs to an Alaska insurance broker named John Walsh, who hasn't seen the boat in over 2 years. Remember those 3 names: Cobbin, Matson, Walsh. In the final 24 hours before this boat goes down, one of them is doing something the other 2 won't fully volunteer to investigators. The crew of 7 includes Gary's own son, David, as a deckhand, a veteran engineer named Brock Rainey, a longtime crewman, Arthur Ganatius, and a returning hand, Seth Russo-Gano. There were also 2 new deckhands that had yet to fish this boat before. John Lawler was hired in Dutch Harbor through a bartender at the end of the king crab season. Dean Gribble Jr. is a 12-hour notice replacement. The night before departure, the deckhand who was supposed to fill that seat quits. Gribble gets a phone call, drives to the dock, and signs on. The captain places them back-to-back on the watch rotation rather than spacing them between experienced hands. The majority owner will later concede under oath that this was contrary to good practice. The crew loads 195 crab pots onto the deck. They chain the stack down. They top off fuel. They take on water and bait. Gary runs a safety drill, how to make a mayday call. He shows the crew the emergency beacon mounted on the starboard side outside the wheelhouse. There is, however, a second emergency beacon. Neither survivor will remember being shown it. Neither will know it existed until investigators ask them weeks later. Before they cast off, the National Weather Service issues a marine forecast for the route. There is a gale warning and a heavy freezing spray warning. Northwest winds at 45 knots, gusts to 55, seas to 21 feet. Heavy freezing spray is the warning that matters. It means cold air, cold water, and wind combining to throw sea spray onto an exposed boat, where it freezes the instant it lands. The ice doesn't just add weight. It adds weight high up, on the railings, on the superstructure, on a 20-foot stack of crab pots. And weight high up is what can capsize a boat. Gary checks the forecast. The crew discusses it. Nothing in the forecast is unusual for a winter run. At 8:35 p.m. on December 30th, the Scandies Rose pulls away from the North Pacific fuel dock in Kodiak. She has about 25 hours to live at this point. The first part of the trip is uneventful. The boat sails out of Kodiak, threads through Whale Pass, rounds into Shelikof Strait around 2 a.m., and turns southwest. Gary takes the long watches himself, 6 hours at a stretch, and rotates the crew through 1-hour stints. Around 6 a.m., the watch starts noticing ice, about an inch in the mesh of the forward pots, a couple of inches on the rails. At 11:18 a.m., Gary picks up the satellite phone and calls another boat, the Amatuli. The Amatuli is hundreds of miles ahead, racing to make a contract in Dutch Harbor by January 1st. The captain of the Amatuli is Dan Matson, the majority owner of the Scandies Rose. The 2 talk for about 12 minutes. Gary tells Matson the boat is in light icing, it's very cold, and the seas are poor. Matson tells him to be careful. Through the afternoon, the wind picks up. The waves build. The boat bucks into the swell. Spray freezes wherever it lands. Dean Gribble, on watch into the evening, watches it accumulating on the starboard pots. At 7:15 p.m., he wakes the captain for the next watch. When Gary arrives on the bridge, they discuss what they're seeing. Worsening weather. Ice building on the superstructure. A list of about 2 degrees to starboard. Gribble asks the captain if he should wake the crew to chop the ice off the pots. Gary says no. They will wait, he says, until they can tuck the boat into protected water. He calls the engineer instead, most likely to transfer fuel between tanks, a routine fix. Gribble heads down to his bunk. On the way out, he takes a last look at the pot stack through the bridge window. All the pots are glazed over with ice. The starboard pots are heavily coated, maybe 2 inches. The inside webbing of those starboard pots is iced too. This detail matters. The regulations governing fishing vessel stability assume ice accumulates symmetrically, the same on the port side as the starboard, and only on the outside of the pots. Gribble is looking at the opposite. Ice mainly on one side and worse, ice on the inside webbing. The boat is loading up with weight the rulebook says shouldn't be there. Around 8 p.m., Gary starts making phone calls. First, he calls a friend in North Carolina to wish her a happy new year. He tells her the boat is icing and has a list. She'll later tell investigators he did not sound alarmed. He said he needed to tuck in someplace safe. Then at 8:37 p.m., Gary calls another fishing captain, a man named Oystein Lone, who runs the Pacific Sounder. The two have known each other for 9 years. Lone is the only person who will hear Gary describe in real time what is actually happening on his boat. Gary tells him the boat is icing really bad. The wind is blowing 60 to 70 knots from the west. The outside temperature is 12 degrees Fahrenheit. It is too rough to send the crew out to chop ice. And he says the boat has developed a 20-degree starboard list. Lone and Gary keep talking, and almost in passing, Gary mentions something else. He says he has just purchased more shares of the Scandies Rose. He sounds excited about it. Lone will tell investigators afterward that Gary did not seem like a man who thought he was in real trouble. It didn't seem that bad, he says. At 9:10 p.m., Lone has to end the call to swap a generator in his own engine room. He'll call Gary back in about 35 minutes. When he does, everything has changed. At 9:45 p.m., the Scandies Rose is 2.5 miles south of an uninhabited Alaskan island called Sutwick. For most of the day, the wind has been hammering her starboard side. Gary now turns the boat about 50 degrees to the right, trying to slip into the lee of the island where the land will block the wind and give the crew a chance to chip the ice off. The turn does the opposite. The wind, which had been pushing on the iced-up starboard side, is now hitting the port side of an already tilted boat. Below decks, the 2 off-watch crewmen are jolted out of their bunks by a sudden, sustained roll to starboard. Lawler yells down to wake Gribble. The other 4 crewmen come up to the bridge too. Gribble starts pulling immersion suits out of the cabinet. The boat is heeled over so far that the chair Lawler is bracing himself on snaps off, and he slides across the deck. Lawler describes what happens next as pure mania.
So I started passing out the suits to everybody, telling them to get them on. And I'm freaking out. The boat's going down, like it's going fast. It's fast. Screaming at these other guys. Get out of the boat. You have to get out of the boat. You gotta get out of the boat.
At about the same moment, Lone finishes his generator change on the Pacific Sounder and picks up the phone to call Gary back. Gary answers. Lone will later say his tone has changed. The captain, who, half an hour earlier, sounded calm and excited about a stock deal, now sounds like a man who is barely holding it together. Gary tells him, "I don't know how this is going to go." Lone says he has never heard that level of stress in his friend's voice before. At 9:55 p.m., Gary keys the high-frequency radio and broadcasts the Mayday.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. Scandies Rose, Scandies Rose, Scandies Rose. We're rolling over.
Lawler and Gribble are outside on the port side of the wheelhouse, half-suited, holding on. They look back through the door and see one of their crewmates standing inside, in his immersion suit. He doesn't come out. The boat lays over, the lights go out. A wave sweeps the 2 of them off the side into a 30-foot sea. The Scandies Rose disappears beneath them. In the water, they get separated. They drift for about 20 minutes, in 12-degree air. In near-freezing water, Lawler sees a light. the strobe from one of the boat's 2 automatically deployed life rafts. He swims a couple hundred yards and climbs in. After several minutes, Gribble hears him yelling, swims over, and pulls himself into the same raft. The raft is not empty. There are 4 feet of seawater inside it. The flares they fire don't seem to attract anything. The light on the raft goes out within 10 minutes. For 4 hours, the 2 men sit in waist-deep ice water on the floor of a wet raft in winds gusting to 50 miles an hour. They wait. The first Coast Guard helicopter out of Air Station Kodiak takes off about an hour and a half after the Mayday. The pilot will later describe the 170-mile flight as the most challenging of his career. The rescue swimmers' goggles freeze. At about 2 a.m., the helicopter finds the first life raft. They drop the swimmer. It is empty. Then they find the second raft. Lawler and Gribble have no flares left. They wave a flashlight. The helicopter spots them. At 2:08 a.m., the hoist begins. Both men are pulled up alive. On the way back, low on fuel, the crew has to shut off the helicopter's auxiliary power unit. The cabin heaters die. 2 hypothermic survivors finish the flight in the cold. A second helicopter has been launched while the first is on the way back. But somewhere in the relay between the rescue helicopter, a Coast Guard C-130, and the command center, the survivors' actual recovery coordinates get garbled. The second helicopter is sent to a search area 7.8 miles north of where the survivors were actually found. It spends over an hour searching the wrong patch of ocean. Nobody else is ever recovered. Everybody else on board are all presumed dead. The Scandies Rose, valued at $5 million, is a total loss. In the weeks that follow, 2 federal agencies start asking the same question. Why did this boat roll over? And what they find is deeply disturbing. The National Transportation Safety Board sends an investigator to Kodiak. The Coast Guard convenes a Marine Board of investigation. One is trying to find probable cause. The other has subpoena power. And almost immediately, the wreck itself creates a problem. In February 2020, an ROV finds the Scandies Rose in 160 feet of water. She is lying on her starboard side, bow pointing east, in a debris field 90 feet wide. The cameras move around the port side, the stern, and the bottom. They do not find an obvious hull breach, but they cannot see the starboard side because the starboard side is buried against the seafloor. That matters because the starboard side is where one of the most troubling repairs on the boat had just been done. Before the sinking, the Scandies Rose had a leaking starboard waste chute. This was basically a steel tube that ran through the hull. During the previous king crab season, seawater had been getting into a void behind it. The crew patched it with underwater epoxy and finished the season. Then, weeks before the final trip, the captain put the problem in writing. He sends photos from inside the void, he labels the walls, he explains where the water had come in, and then he writes the line that should stop everyone cold. The leaks are coming through the splash zone that we applied to keep from sinking last winter. That is the captain of the Scandies Rose, telling another owner that the boat had already come close enough to sinking that the crew had patched the leak just to get through the season. And 6 weeks later, the boat goes down on the same side. The chute repair gets messier the closer you look. The first major repair appears to have been done by Aztec Welding in Seattle, where wasted steel around the starboard waste chute was patched over with doubler plates instead of fully cut out. Then Highmark Marine Fabrication in Kodiak was brought in to redo the forward chute, with a young welder cutting out the bad steel, fabricating a new chute, and checking his own work with dye penetrant, a surface crack test, not proof the repair would hold under pressure at sea. And then comes the ugly detail. At the Marine Board hearing, the shipyard owner is asked about Aztec and says he does not allow them in his yard. When asked why, he refuses to explain. Aztec is never called to testify. So by the end, investigators have a failed Seattle repair, an improperly tested chute, and an older closure nobody seems to re-inspect, and the one side of the boat that could answer the question is pinned against the ocean floor. So the Coast Guard leaves that door open. The repairs to the aft starboard chute cannot be ruled out as a possible hull failure. The NTSB, by contrast, says no hull breach was found. Both statements are technically true, but only one reminds you what the camera never saw. Unfortunately, the chute is only one piece of this. Investigators also turn to the stability book, the document that tells the captain how the boat can be loaded and still survive. And this is where things start looking negligent. It had been updated only 8 months before the sinking. On paper, that should have been reassuring. Unfortunately for the crew, it was the opposite. The Coast Guard Marine Safety Center rebuilds the vessel model and reruns the 11 sample loading conditions in the book. All 11 fail. Not most. All 11. The book fails the intact stability criteria. It fails the severe wind and roll criteria. It fails the water on deck criteria. The captain had a stability book, but according to the Coast Guard's reconstruction, the book was mathematically and physically wrong. The naval architect, Bruce Culver, later testifies he did not personally verify where the engine room air intakes were. He was told they were high, real high. So in his model, the boat would have to roll almost 90 degrees before they mattered. The Coast Guard places them much lower. At about 30 degrees of heel, water can start getting in. That is not a small mistake. That is the difference between a boat fighting to recover and a boat starting to flood. Even worse, he admits the vessel's empty weight appears to have grown by 180 tons between his 1988 and 2019 calculations. He flagged this to the owner at the time and acknowledged he might have, in his words, possible missing weights. The number was accepted anyway. He also admits when asked if he is aware of a prior complaint filed against his stability work regarding a different boat, that yes, he is aware the complaint was declined. Then there is the timing. In the final 24 hours of Gary Cobbin Jr.'s life, he is not just captaining a crab boat through freezing spray. He is also trying to buy more of it. A year before the sinking, Gary and minority owner John Walsh have a verbal agreement. Walsh will sell his stake. The number starts around $340,000, then drops. In the text thread, Walsh offers a cash discount down to $225,000. He says, "I would like to close ASAP." On December 30th, the day the boat leaves Kodiak, Gary's sister says he had just sent $57,000 toward buying more interest in the boat. She was mildly confused because earlier that year, Gary was complaining about running out of money. Walsh says Gary had sent the down payment. Oystein Loan says Gary mentioned the purchase during their final phone call, while the boat already had a 20-degree list. Neither report ever figured out where Gary had found the money for the purchase. That does not prove the buyout caused the sinking, but it does change the atmosphere. A captain with 2 parents dead in the last year, a failing stability book, an iced-up boat, a half-new crew, a repaired starboard chute, and a major financial deal unfolding in real time. That is the version of the story the clean summaries do not really capture. The post-accident drug testing is messy, but it does not rewrite the sinking. One survivor tested positive for THC, but the samples were not chain of custody compliant or sent to a certified lab. The Marine Board called that a regulatory violation and also questioned a late hire pre-employment test, but recommended no enforcement action in either case. What gets even weirder is that the Scandies Rose's EPIRB never transmitted after the sinking. When the wreck was later inspected by ROV, investigators found the EPIRB bracket empty, but the beacon itself was never located. Neither survivor remembers being shown it despite an earlier safety drill happening. It's possible that it ended up in the wheelhouse when things started going awry, but this is just speculation. Arguably, the most distressing part of the story is that Bruce Culver faced no repercussions for his role in the sinking of the Scandies Rose. And worst of all, he could go out tomorrow and write a stability book for another boat. That is where the official story ends. 2 men survived, 5 did not. Go ahead and hit subscribe if you'd like to be notified when we post, or consider giving a thumbs up if you enjoyed this one.